Hey everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of The Daily Objective. I am Rucka, and as usual, we have the Greek energy personified, Nikos, and a special guest today, a guy who you'll never believe what this guy's accomplished. He's a rapper, he's a weightlifter, and catch this, he has his own podcast. And the craziest part is he's from Saudi Arabia. And if you're wondering, how could someone from Saudi accomplish so much? Well, because at least Saudi Arabia is not the American school system. Hey, everybody. How you doing?
Good. We're good, thanks. And today we're going to discuss the silent majority, which I find an interesting term. So how did we come up with this topic? So usually when let's say what we'd call the right, when they realize that looks like they're losing the battle of ideas, or when they're losing the culture, usually the comeback line is that, yeah, but we have the silent majority. So all this started in the late 60s with Nixon, and it was during the time of the big protests about Vietnam and the counterculture, Woodstock. Okay, Woodstock hadn't happened yet, but all these things were kind of taking over the American society. And Nixon's reply was that, yes, but there is this silent majority. There's this silent group of people who don't go out in the streets, who don't make too much noise, but they are the ones who uphold the right values. And these are the people who are going to basically make sure that we prevail. And indeed, at that time, it looks like this worked. So they won the elections, Nixon won. And then after a small parenthesis, Reagan won another 8 years. And this term came back in the last weeks when Trump said, well, looks like there's this madness out there, but actually the silent majority is with us. So Zuby, do you think there is such a thing as silent majority? And if it does, do you think it plays such a significant role in where the culture goes and where basically the battle of ideas is decided?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think the silent majority is absolutely a thing. The vast majority of the people in any society are not activists, are not on social media. In fact, the vast majority of people do not even vote. Most people are pretty apolitical, and even those who vote aren't super duper into politics. So I think it's absolutely a vast majority of people whose voices aren't really heard. It's very possible to make it seem like it's very possible, especially in the advent of social media, to make it seem that 5% of the population is 60% of the population. You see this on a lot of different issues. If you spend a lot of time on Twitter or on YouTube or on Instagram, etc., it might seem like, oh my gosh, everybody is thinking this one thing. For example, if you go back to the Brexit vote, if you go back to the 2016 US election vote, and you're seeing what influencers and celebrities and just general social media users are saying, if that's all you're going by, you'd easily be forgiven for thinking that, okay, Remain is definitely going to win, right? Because it seems like there aren't that many people who are loudly pushing for Brexit outside of, this handful of people. You may well think, okay, I haven't seen any celebrities supporting Donald Trump. I haven't seen any of these social media people with big voices supporting Donald Trump. So obviously he can't win, right? Everyone is talking about Hillary. The polls are saying Hillary, etc. But as we know, then and now, there are vast numbers of people, millions and millions of people who, for different reasons, some people, they just aren't interested in sharing their views publicly. Some people, a lot of people fear backlash if they don't have views that align a certain way, especially if they are more right-wing or conservative or nationalistic. And, there are very valid reasons why some people have those concerns, etc. So the silent majority is definitely a thing. How large a percentage of it is, you normally can't really tell until election time and when, the rubber meets the road. But I think the concept is a very real thing.
Right. So, Rucka, here's the thing, though. How long can a society maintain its main values, so to speak, if the silent majority continues to be silent? Because that's my problem with the whole issue. For example, why do we know people like Zuby? Because they're brave in social media, they come forward with their ideas. But if the silent majority expresses itself every 4 years in the ballot box, and in between these 4 years, the battle of ideas is lost, or there is not even such a thing as a battle of ideas. How long do you think that the silent majority can be a factor in making sure that the country goes on a specific route?
Good question. I'll give you an answer. Well, I mean, there's different ways to look at the silent majority. In some cases, they actually harbor views that I'm glad are not acceptable in the mainstream. But let's look at the most charitable view of the silent majority, the sort of salt of the earth, the American sense of life, if you like, the sort of de facto anti-intellectual, because all that comes out of the universities is anti-reality, anti-capitalist, anti-individualistic, anti-egoistic. And there's this sort of almost concrete bound salt of the earth energy of people that are just sort of brushing all of that aside and letting the media say what they will and letting teachers teach what they will. But at the end of the day, they're into going to work and pursuing the life that they want. That seems to be a flame that still will not be extinguished. It's lasted much longer than it should, I mean, Nikos, you're from Greece. You guys invaded Israel in the story of Hanukkah. And those candles, it is said, stayed lit for 8 days when it should have lasted for less than one. That seems to be the American sense of life, the way I see it. I mean, Germany, like this, became fascist when the intellectuals went that route. Virtually the rest of the world, as soon as the intellectuals issue their vision, the public seems to respond. But America, I think Leonard Peikoff describes it in The Dim Hypothesis, his book, that like the sort of personalities of the founding fathers seems to be the one thing gatekeeping against these intellectual trends. And I do see that. I call it the ghosts of the founding fathers still walking among us, no matter how anti-individualistic, anti-capitalist, etc. the public sort of acceptable philosophy is. There still seems to be this entrepreneurial spirit among us. And I could sort of point to the ghost of Thomas Jefferson, even if his statue is being pulled down.
That's the interesting thing, because you said these are the gatekeepers and we see them being torn down. So that's kind of a worrying thing. So here's another thing, though. I think something even more interesting than the idea of the silent majority is an emerging counterculture. So around 2 years ago, we would hear the term that conservatism is the new counterculture, or pulling yourself together is the new counterculture. Now, personally, I don't consider political conservatism as that radical, but because I think we have someone with us who is an embodiment of this counterculture. So someone who is, unapologetically says, no, you should strive for more. Beauty is a thing. Masculinity is a thing. So Zuby, do you see yourself as like a countercultural rebel? So do you think that you're in the position that, let's say, the radicals in the 1960s in Woodstock would be the equivalent? So there is an established ideology and we are coming forward to destroy this ideology. So do you see yourself as this kind of radical?
No, I don't see myself as any kind of radical. I think that in a normal world and in a normal culture and a normal society, then I wouldn't be seen in any remotely controversial light. And I don't think a lot of people like myself who do speak out with some of the things that we're saying would be seen in any kind of radical or controversial light. What I think has happened is in the past 5 to 10 years especially, and I think social media has largely accelerated this, I think it's been a very, very prominent factor, is that, look, society has just become weird. It's become, in some aspects, a lot of aspects of society and modern Western culture, especially in the Anglosphere, here in the UK, the US, Canada, etc., when it comes to certain issues, some things have just become very detached from reality. That's one of the most disturbing parts, as in, like, people can't even agree on reality and the facts anymore. And I find that kind of disturbing. But then also when it comes to opinions on certain things, and not just opinions, but the ability to express them and the ability to think freely and not have to go along with the herd on everything, not have to worry about being canceled, as people say. Like, there's a lot of terminology and words. I mean, just look at the language that people use now. there are a lot of words and terms and phrases that are very popular now and that you see on social media, and you might even see companies using, etc. You'll see them in universities amongst young people, older people. And just 10 years ago, if you just go back to 2010, 2009, a lot of these words and terms were not being bandied around all over the place, right? Never in my life before, we're in 2020 right now, never have I heard so many people talking about things like white privilege, white fragility, white supremacy, right? Like as if the KKK is coming back or something. You see what I mean? So many people, talking about people of color this, BAME this, like cisgender that, male privilege, safe spaces, trigger warnings, like all of this terminology is just sort of being bandied around everywhere and thrown out all over the place. And I'm kind of like, oh, that's new. That's interesting. I've been around for a little while, and I don't remember, even when I was in university, I don't remember people talking in this language. And so I think that's a very good indicator of where the culture and society is going, especially when you're seeing that not just in fringe academia, but, I work in music, right? And you're seeing this all over the music world. You're starting to see it coming out of corporate workplaces. You're seeing it coming from different brands and companies, et cetera. They're all jumping on this social, this sort of very politically correct, woke, progressive bandwagon. You're looking at organizations, whether it's the UN, the ACLU, all of these organizations, they're all jumping into, they're all sort of running off this cliff where they're not even making sense. You're saying, yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting that some years ago, for example, I saw even men's fitness magazines like Men's Health, they would go down that road. So I remember some years ago, and that was the last thing I had anything to do with Men's Health. They had an article that says, these are some gyms which are, let's say, centers of resistance against Trump. And I was like, what? That's very weird. So you're a magazine, and I don't want to stereotype, but I would expect that, at least research says that Republicans tend to be more, into fitness and bodybuilding and these things. So the interesting thing with these organizations is that their urge, their fanaticism, or whatever this thing is so fierce that it doesn't even stop them from compromising their profits. So, Rucka, do you think that we're in a time where these ideas are so unquestioned and are considered such an orthodoxy that they don't even care about their customers of the silent majority? Because you could say, yes, maybe, okay, the left has won the culture wars, but still 50% of the population doesn't really buy into it. So I'll make sure that I'll cater to both. And it's a famous Michael Jordan, Republicans buy sneakers as well. So what is happening there? Why is it that it's as if this percentage of the population is written off, even as consumers?
Well, good question. And I'll tell you this. It's because, there's, it's like this silent majority, this sort of archetypical white male, whatever, is basically used as a, microcosm, as a scarecrow for capitalism and for individualism and really for reason, ultimately. All roads do lead to philosophy. And it is the rejection of reason in the first place that got us here. And the rejection of reason was largely linked with the rejection of capitalism, linked with the rejection of Enlightenment type epistemology, reason. These things do go together. And the more that intellectuals, the more that the people at the top of philosophy departments around the world conclude that the individual cannot observe reality firsthand and live by his own independent judgment, then the next question becomes, okay, then how should we organize? How should we engineer society? How should we tell people what to do? We happen to still have a legal system, a political system that was founded by Enlightenment thinkers. And it's an old system. It's centuries old, and it's not going to be easy for anyone to overthrow and change. But today's populace, today's society would never dream of establishing something like this. Look at Twitter. Look at everyone wanting to just dictate laws, wanting to throw people in prison based on public, outcry. Look
at universities who claim that the innocent until proven guilty is male-centric or sexist or anyways, not good, not fit for practice in terms of justice.
Absolutely. I mean, on so many levels, the founding fathers and their ideas and the better elements of the Enlightenment are rejected and have been for a long time. So what we see around us is just a symptom of the problem with all this, this new vocabulary we're seeing around, with all this sort of conflating privilege with just existing, etc. Ultimately, this silent majority, as we can call them, they're not philosophers, they're not intellectuals. They are, as much as they might be dragging their feet, at the end of the day, they do follow the lead of the thinkers, of the intellectual leaders in their own community, or the ones that are whose ideas are seeping out of the media, which is why over time you see conservatives singing a different tune. Used to be conservatives a short time ago were paying lip service to capitalism. Just a few years ago, you had the Tea Party. This was this big thing. People were holding up pictures of Ayn Rand saying, where's John Galt? Who is John Galt? Stop taxing us, stop regulating. I mean, there were different voices heard, but still the Tea Party was, I can understand someone saying that and saying, look, the people want capitalism. So a blink of an eye later, and there's no remnant of that. The politicians elected in 2010 are now full-on Trump guys, the anti-trade populists. I mean, so there's just nothing left of that. You can see that conservatives, at the end of the day, they really are just kind of picking up what the left discards. They are rummaging through the left's dumpster and picking out things that the left has gotten bored of.
It's the famous Michael Marley saying that conservatism is progressivism running the speed limit. So one last point I'm going to throw on the table, and it's something that I quite often find myself confused which way to follow. So one way would be to just lead a rational life. What Zuby said, which is what I do and what I represent 10 years ago, would be completely normal. So one way is, look, I'm going to be an example. And I think that is part of the appeal of people like Zuby or Joe Rogan that we discussed the other day. There are people who, they seem happy, they seem healthy, they seem living a good life, maybe with Rogan, not always rational with the drugs and all that stuff, but basically you lead by example. But the other thing is what Rucka said, that no, what guides a society is at the very end of the day, the ideas, the universities, the intellectuals, the philosophers. So just being a good example and a happy person and a beautiful person is not enough. So Zuby, which of the two ways shall we follow? Or is there a dichotomy between these two roads?
Look, I think it depends on what someone's role is. You know, are you someone who is a public figure who is trying to influence the culture and have an impact, whether that's through real world activities or political activism or social media or art, whatever the case is? If it's that, then I think you need to think more along the lines of the latter, perhaps. If you're the average person who isn't really sort of trying to build an audience or a following or influence, and you're just trying to look after yourself and your family, your children, etc., then, you know, it's up to that individual how much they want to get involved and also how much they need to. And even if they get massively involved, how much sway is that really going to have if they don't have a large platform and audience? So I'm very much an individualist in one sense, in the sort of free thinking terms, but I'm also super pro family and pro community, and I think that we need to make sure in such an individualistic society that people don't become too atomized. And I think that's one of the big downfalls that's happened in the West with the sort of breakup of the family, is people have become too individualistic in a sense. This is part of why you're seeing rising mental health issues, why you're seeing rising homelessness, addiction, etc. I believe a lot of that stuff is rooted to the sort of family breakdown and this atomization of individuals. We're more connected than ever, but people are actually more lonely than ever. More people are reporting they don't have friends. You're seeing suicide going up, self-harm going up, all of that stuff. So I think, that's part of why, for me, from a sort of cultural, societal and moral perspective, I find it kind of important to, resist some of this dismantling of everything and dismantling of all standards, because there are things that, you always need a healthy balance between conservatism and liberalism and progressivism, because sometimes there are some aspects of society and culture and tradition that you do want to maintain and that they're good and you do want to change. Not all change is good. Just because you change something, it doesn't mean you're improving it. So you want to find the things that can be improved and then, tinker with that and change it slowly, not just sort of run off a cliff with it. And most people are open to that. And I think that sort of touches on that idea you said, that quote from Michael Malice, whom I know, about it, conservatism, progressivism driving the speed limit. Some people take that as kind of an affront or kind of a diss to conservatism, but at the same time, look, times change, and conservatism in 2020 doesn't mean the same thing it would have in 1940, right? It's not like you're trying to take things back to 1940. It's more like, okay, we all want to improve society. We all want to make things better. We all understand that progress is going to happen regardless in every sense. But let's make sure we maintain the good stuff and don't, throw the baby out with the proverbial bathwater. So I think that's the healthy balance.
I'll agree with what you said, that there is no contradiction between having a strong self and being what we call philosophical and individualist and caring about community and family. I think the problem today is that people are maybe narcissistic, but not really individuals in the sense of being sovereign individuals. Because when someone says that my well-being depends on everyone recognizing the world and seeing the world from the prism that I see it, that basically means that you are lacking a self, rather than that, in my opinion, that you're too individualistic. But Rucka, I'll leave to you the last words. So give us the food for thought for the rest of the evening.
I mean, we've opened so many Pandora's boxes here that it would take dozens of hours to address all of it. But I mean, I'll borrow a phrase from the communist apologists, and I'll say that wasn't real individualism, pointing at the homeless guy. That wasn't real individualism, pointing at the shouting SJWs. And if you ask the SJWs or their professors, what does reason mean? What does it mean? Like they'll give you some postmodern explanation. It really is the rejection of reason that gave us this modern world in the negative sense. And the positive elements, which I see to be technology, a respect for political freedom, respect for science, which is, linked with technology, that comes from actual individualism. Benjamin Franklin, that's an individualist. He was a man who respected science, and he took ethics seriously. He looked for an ethics that was selfish in a rational sense. And that's what I think we're missing right now. So thank you, Nikos. Thank you, Zuby.
Actually, shall we leave to Zuby the last word to tell us where people can find him, what he's up to these days?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So if you are listening, you can follow me on all social media at Zuby Music. That is ZUBY Music. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Parler, Facebook, Minds, everything. I've all got my book out right now, Strong Advice, Zuby's Guide to Fitness for Everybody. And if you go to my website, zubymusic.com, you've got links to everything there, including my book, my podcast, merchandise, everything. So you can check that out.
Good. Thank you very much, Zuby. Thanks for giving a good example about what a good life can be, with fitness and with fighting the battle of ideas, and with actually, at the end of the day, with being happy. You seem to me a happy guy, and that's why I enjoy, your social media kind of presence. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow with Mark Pellegrino talking about Hollywood and the battle of ideas there. Goodbye, everyone.